The corridor hummed like a live wire. Light panels set into the bulkheads pulsed with the slow, regular rhythm of the station's heartbeat. In Bay 12, under the hive of maintenance rigs and the ever-present rain of spare parts, Mara Osei kept the machinery honest. She was good at coaxing temperamental pumps and complaining reactors back into steadiness with a touch and a curse. Good, too, at keeping two worlds apart, the one of leaky valves and oil-streaked hands, and the other where her son Jonah slept with a stuffed comet under his arm and believed their small bunks above the workshop were the whole of home. Grief had an architecture to it. Mara had learned to build around the empty space where Tarek used to be. She had learned to make plans that assumed only 2 people instead of 3, to fold birthday rituals down to a single candle and a story, to answer the question, "How are you?" With a practical list of repairs due that week, grief took the furniture of her life and rearranged it. She did not like the way some rooms now echoed. It was late. The station's central feeds had dimmed. Most offices slipped into that twilight where systems ran on routine and everyone else slept or pretended to. Mara was supposed to be at home. Jonah was at his night class at the Learning Loft, a municipal program that kept him occupied while Mara took emergency shifts, but she'd stayed to finish calibrating an old hydroregulator that was giving the council a headache. Shouldn't have been touching her cum with oil still on her hands, but she did. Her thumb fumbled the gestures. The cracked glass of her handheld had a spiderweb line right over the Messages app. She slid through conversations automatically, vendor confirmations, shift notes, a half-finished thread with Jace, her friend since the days of apprentice badges and bad cafeteria coffee. Jace liked to tease, to push at her walls with jokes until she laughed so hard she forgot the ache behind her ribs. Her thumb hovered over the private, lined with Jace. She typed something that burned with the smallness of human life. "You remember when Seryk said he'd teach Jonah to dance? Fuck, I miss him. I think about failing him sometimes. I'm tired. I don't know how to be both of us. It should have stayed there." It was meant for a friend, but the cracked screen turned her intention into a traitor. A nearby icon titled *High Command Liaison. Seryk * had been accidentally selected in the split second between shame and send. The message, exposed and raw, launched across roughly translated protocols and slipped into the inbox of Seryk, Supreme Arbiter of the Kareth Consulate, whose office presided over the station's trade treaty, whose face was on ration posters and in whispered corners, where workers called him the razor for the way he pruned. Dissent in the councils. He was not someone who replied to civvies. He did not do small comforts. He did not reply with jokes or sympathy or the human ache of being alone. He did not have time for the private weather of Mara Osei's heart. He commanded fleets. He brokered culls. He kept colonies in order. Mara's heart, which had held its own rhythm for so long, skipped. The cum pinged almost immediately, an indicator of priority. Flagged by the alien liaison system and, then a single line. "I am on Bay 12. The message arrived with etiquette that smelled like protocol. Concise. Efficient, impossible to read as anything but official." Mara's palms went slick. She scrubbed at them with the rag she had on her belt. Coal systems hummed. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, a refrigeration core cycled. She had imagined Seryk 1,000 times, of course. The station's screens insisted on his image tall, angular, capped with the iridescent ridges of his species. The Kareth, a lineage of exoskeletal brilliance. Their skin like polished bronze, eyes slitted into calculating planes. He moved like a predator in court attire, robes that hung like star charts. He did not do casual. He did not come unannounced. He came anyway. Mara cursed softly, not with a human expletive. An old Carethian term that had leaked into the lingua franca of the docksand left the regulator untouched. She wiped grease from her palms with the back of her hand and opened the hatch to the service ladder. He was already in the bay when she climbed out, not yet in the full regalia of his office, but not in casual either. His shoulders were covered by a ceremonial carapace that hinted at rank. Under it, his silhouette was tall and unexpectedly sleek, limbs that ended in hands with subtle caliper joints. Up close, his muzzle was gentler than the faces in propaganda. His eyes were not slits so much as wells deep, reflective, unreadable. Technician Osei? His voice translated itself into basic, with the coolness of an observatory. It was the voice the reports described, measured, the kind that could make a committee rethink a dissenting point. It did not carry condolences. She could have lied. She could have said the message had been a glitch, a missent note. She could have folded this and pushed it under the stack of work orders, the way grief itself had been tucked under the protocols and repairs of everyday life. Instead, she did the other thing she had always done. She told the truth. It was meant for a friend, she said. Her voice was smaller than she liked. Tarek's. My husband, he's gone. Seryk's eyes did something then that surprised her. They brightened, not with emotion, but with a technical kind of attention, as if a diagnostic had completed. You carry emotional data openly, he observed. This is a rare practice among your cohort. It felt for an instant like an observation and like a question. He stepped closer, not a threatening closeness, but a removal of distance. As if proximity could be used to learn more efficient truths, rare or frowned upon. She asked because humor had always been a buffer for her. Both, he said. He tilted his head in a motion that, in Kareth culture, meant something like empathy. You are a single parent. Ara's face must have shown the surprise. Her mouth tightened. Jonah, at 12, had a mop of hair and too many questions and a resilient laugh that could reboot her for a day. To see that factuality recognized by him, a being whose species kept intimacy behind 3 kinds of summons, felt like being seen by a star that had suddenly noticed a single pebble. He did not stand there offering human platitudes. He offered instead what he had in abundance, observation and time. He asked calmly if he might see Jonah's room if the boy was around, and Mara, against better sense, walked him through the narrow path to the upper bunks. The child was not there. He had been at the learning loft as promised. Seryk peered in at the small toys, touching nothing, cataloging. When Mara returned to the bay, she found him examining the hydroregulator with an intensity that rivaled any of her own. His movements were precise, respectful of machines in a way she had learned to expect only from old mechanics. It's stubborn, she said. It's been stuck since the last orbital impact. If we don't fix it, the Council will reroute water flow and blame the operators. He listened. He watched her hands. He asked a small practical question about pressure differentials, and then a much stranger one. Why did you send the message? She blinked. There were reasons that lived under the skin of her life, small, ugly things like unpaid medical bills. Like the way Jonah's laugh did not sound the same when Seryk wasn't in the room, like the sharpness of birthdays. But the immediate answer rose first. Because I am tired of pretending everything is fine, she said. Because I once thought grief was an instruction manual I could follow. It isn't. Seryk's brow ridges moved. You carry responsibility and company. That is a heavy configuration. They set to work, because machines are honest and require attention, regardless of the size of one's heart. Working shoulders to appendage created a gravity of its own. He did not do fluff. He did not make soft noises. He measured and calibrated, and Mara found herself, without planning, explaining things to him the way she explained them to the child. She used metaphors shaped by repair manuals and lullabies. He listened as if he desired not the drama of her pain but the architecture of it, the way feelings were assembled and could sometimes be repaired. When he left hours later, after the regulator whispered back to life and the Council's threat ebbed, his farewell was as brief as his arrival. Yet, before he stepped into the corridor leading to the lifts, he made a statement that was neither command nor courtesy. I will return, he said. Rumors are the currency of stations. By morning, the bay's staff were whispering about Seryk's visit. Why had the Supreme Arbiter visited Bay 12? Had he cut a personal inspection of hydro systems? Had he come to assess a saboteur? The Council's propaganda wheels spun a story about efficiency and oversight. Others, Mercers in the lower rings, said he must have been seeking someone. any contact with the human element to validate his strategies, Seryk found Mara in the workshop the next week with a worrying regularity. He came to ask about equipment and left with a lingering query about Jonah's school progress. He brought once an artifact from Kareth archives, a small, folded card with a pattern that, when explained through the translator's dry syntax, meant shared burden. He began to ask her about the way humans honored the dead. She told him about wakes and poetry and Seryk's stubborn collection of scratched coffee mugs. Slowly, absurdly, trust accrued, like lichen on the underside of a hull. He learned Jonah's favorite constellations and once arrived at a Cums relay with a bag of ration cookie sweet. Grainy things Jonah's mouth devoured with the greed of a child who trusted a new adult. Rumors hardened into whispers, then into formal memos. The council did not like their arbiter spending unscheduled time with a junior technician. The Kareth High House did not like the arbiter showing interest in a species, still marked as politically pliant. The station's political air changed by degrees. Official notices were issued about Seryk's diplomatic outreach. Conservative factions in the council began to mutter about protocol breaches and the optics of fraternizing downward. An industrial consortium with interests in the station's water contracts made a point of sponsoring a public briefing that showed photos of Seryk at a formal table with governor's pictures that omitted Mara by design. Mara felt the walls pressing. Jonah started to ask careful questions about rumors at school. Other kids' parents asked why their children should share maker's space with a boy whose life was suddenly the subject of interest. She was not naive. She knew that when you were visible, you became a chess piece. She also knew, intimately, that she had no time for playing the station's political game. Then the blow came not as a rumor, but as a decree. The council, under pressure from corporate stakeholders and a faction of Kareth traditionalists, issued a summons. Seryk must resign from his post as arbiter for failing to maintain the dignity and nonpartisan posture of his office. The official statement used sterile nouns, impartiality compromised. Risk to interspecies equilibrium, but everyone on the docks knew the truth. Seryk had allowed himself to be seen as anything other than an immovable state. It was a political execution tailored to leave no blood on the documents. Mara watched the press of systems and the way the station's governance apparatus moved with steamroller efficiency. She went to the liaison when the resignation was handed down. He was in the same bare office, the windows of the station's command deck behind him showing the pale smear of distant suns. Where once there had been the sharpness of rank, there now lay the blur of consequences. He did not try to plead his case. In Kareth custom, honor was often a currency as fungible as anything else. "I do not want to be the cause of your hardship," Mara said. "If your resignation keeps the station calm," he stopped her with a small Kareth gesture, a hand, open, almost human. "This is not an outcome I desired. I am aware of the trade-offs." His voice held something like fatigue. "But I did not seek favor for myself. I sought respite from my own configuration." "Could stay," she said, more out of stubbornness than hope. "We can keep quiet. We can know." He stared out the window at the slow spin of the ring. "It will not be quiet. I have held positions where whispers grow into fires. I will not see that fire spread through your community." His words were practical in origin. The choice, when he said it, folded into something else. He had the look of a being who had calculated sacrifice and decided to carry it rather than inflict it. Later that night, after the vote and the formal announcement, Seryk packed in the privacy his rank still afforded. He left his ceremonial carapace, symbol of authority, on the bed of his private cabin, and then stopped, as if listening for something. He did not write a resignation to save face. He signed nothing that could be used against Mara. He took instead a personal decision. That would not be filed in any archive, he tendered. A notice to command that he was relinquishing the post. In moving to an unaligned settlement, outside the consulate's immediate control, by law and custom, an arbiter who resigned in good standing retained certain protections. The resignation would be formal, but the move would be his choice. Mara fragmented into two responses. Relief like a quick flood and grief again. because she had watched a person powerful and terrible in the ways power can be choose to make himself smaller for her sake. She wanted to say thank you in a way language made insufficient. Instead, she cooked a modest meal, and they ate in the alley behind the bay, under strings of maintenance lights. Jonah's skeletal in conversation with an alien who did not share his species' cultural rhythms, but who sat on a crate and learned to laugh at a badly told joke. The political machinery roared for a while longer. Boards met. Contracts were renegotiated. A corporate lobbyist suggested transferring Mara's badge to a neighboring colony as a way to de-escalate optics. Jonah's questions were quiet at night. About where they would go if the station became inhospitable? Mara answered with the slow patience of someone who had learned to build shelter in unstable ground. Seryk's sacrifice was not a clean one. He left behind more than rank. He left behind expectations and a history of command. He did not ask for a knighthood or praise. Instead, he chose the messier thing, exile with meaning. He took a position as operations overseer on Elysium Ring, a remote colony that traded in salvaged architecture. A place where protocols were more suggestions than law. There he could exist outside the consulate's political gravity and, importantly, he could be visible to Mara without the machinery of state turning their meetings into a spectacle. Mara had choices of her own. She could take the corporate transfer, follow safety and a steady wage, and keep Jonah in the orbit of what she knew. She could stay and fight the council's whispers, or an option that seemed at once the most reckless and the most honest, she could resign from her permanent post and accept a small contractor's offer on Elysium Ring. A position that promised instability, but also proximity. She did not consult a manual. She listened to Jonah, who had watched Seryk with the fierce curiosity of a child who saw another adult try to be good. Dad would have wanted us to be brave, Jonah said, because grief had taught him to pick up metaphors and make them into armor. He wanted somewhere new. He wanted not to be the boy who lost a father, but to belong somewhere else. They left 2 weeks later, with nothing more than a crate of tools. A battered picture of Seryk, Jonah's stuffed comet, and passports stamped with the ring's coordinates. The farewell at the station was small and awkward, less like a public ceremony and more like the end of a work shift. Seryk waited on the landing platform as if accepting them into something undecided but open. He did not arrive in carapace. He arrived as an individual whose rank had been folded into history. Elysium Ring was a place of salvaged futures. A collection of habitats made from the bones of older stations, stitched with bright cloth and second-hand tech. It smelled of ozone and citrus and the resin coatings of recovered ships. People there moved with the freedom of those who had chosen exile for growth rather than been pushed. Seryk's office was modest. A window that faced 3 industrial moons, a map table scattered with salvage bids, and a small shelf with books and an embroidered token. Mara recognized from the gift he'd given Jonah. They found each other in the space after duty. There were no breadcrumbs of protocol to follow. Instead, there was the raw work of starting a life, registering for housing, teaching Jonah to fish a salvage drone out of a flooded culvert, negotiating cultural rituals. Kareth, meals were eaten with a shared liquid that tasted like earth. Mara taught him to make coffee bitter in a way he had never known to appreciate. Seryk learned to be there for Jonah in a way that required no oath. He could not be Seryk. He did not attempt to be. He sat at Jonah's school recitals, learning the small human songs that held the child's childhood together. He learned reluctantly and with humor. How to braid Jonah's hair in the old ways people on the ring had adapted for children of many species. He learned to cook Mara's favorite curry, replicating the spice mixes from the station's market stalls, muttering to himself when the flavors failed to balance. And Mara learned to let someone else hold the edges of her grief for a moment without assuming he would drop them. He would sometimes sit on the bunk and, without asking, run a set of mechanical assessments for the station just to calm himself. She would talk about Seryk, small details, the beard he had never trimmed properly, the way he hummed when he worked hand. Seryk would listen, and then, in the manner of his species, tell a story about Kareth morning rituals where they sculpted their memories into stone, about the loneliness of a leader whose duties separated him from simple joys, Rumors on Elysium Ring were gentler. People there admired bravery in all its shapes. The courage to leave, the courage to remain, the courage to tender an apology. Their found family, the neighbors who fixed each other's roofs, the kids who shared repaired drones for races, wove together in a communal tapestry built of choice rather than obligation. Jonah made new friends, and Mara made a life in which laughter returned like a tide. The final knot arrived quietly months later. The consulate, watching the world reconfigure, attempted a reconciliation. There were offers, an advisory post with constraints, a return with oversight. Seryk's name was on the board again. As whispers suggested, the consulate needed his quiet hand. He could return to power. Perhaps under new terms, they sat across from each other at their modest table. A slow rain outside the window making the ring gleam like a memory. The offer was weighty. It could restore safety, income, and Seryk's facility to influence policy. But the price included distance, secrecy, a return to the role that required him to be a symbol rather than a person. He looked at Mara, then at Jonah, who was asleep curled around the stuffed comet. "They asked me to sacrifice the life I have built with you," Seryk said. There was no drama in the confession, only the arithmetic of choices. Public office would mean I do not belong to you fully. Mara felt the old systems of caution rising in her chest. She had lived many small sacrifices. She had folded them into a life that kept them breathing. But she had also learned in the months since Seryk's resignation that some gambles pay in kinds of currency not measured in ledger lines. She thought of Seryk and how he had never chosen safety over being with his family when the chance came. She thought of Jonah's laugh and the way it had returned like a tide. "Then don't go back," she said. The words were blunt. The world will keep needing reeled-in arbiters. But Jonah needs a person who shows up for him without a shield. I need someone who will be messy with me. If you take the post back, you'll be an image again. And we'll be whatever URL the council decides. Seryk's hand reached, then stopped. For a moment the distance between species felt like geography. Then he reached again, this time for the tangible, his translator pendant, still warm from his chest. He placed it on the table beside the stuffed comet. "If I return to the office," he said softly, "it will be as your ally, not your master. But if I stay, I will be imperfect and present. I will be a person you can rely on because I choose to be." Mara's answer was not elaborate. It never had been. She looked at Jonah, at the sleeping rise of his chest, and then at the ring of moons. Then stay. They married months later, not with trumpets and full regalia, but with an assembly of friends, salvage captains, exiled diplomats, the kids from Jonah's drone races, and a few Kareth elders who had come to accept a new model of kinship. The ceremony borrowed elements from both cultures, a shared binding of hands with a strip of starcloth, lighting of a small flame that neither extinguished nor demanded worship. They exchanged vows that were practical and tiny and vast. Promises to fix leaky roofs, to keep the child's stuffed comet from getting lost, to hold each other when grief returned, years later. On a day when the ring glinted with a storm's afterlight, Mara stood in the workshop and watched Seryk teaching Jonah the delicate dance of balancing a propulsion coil. "He's braver than I ever gave him credit for," Seryk murmured. "He forgave me a steeper slope than I expected." Mara leaned against a console, grease on her forearms, and smiled. "Courage isn't only big things," she answered. "It's making mistakes in front of someone and staying to fix them." Jonah grinned as the small coil spun steady. He loved both adults in his life with a fierce simplicity. Around them, the found family of Elysium Ring hummed in small businesses and communal dinners, and the kind of neighborly barrages that made life both louder and softer. They had not escaped politics entirely. News of Seryk's choices circulated. Some wrote him off as a traitor to the consulate. Others admired him for an integrity that chose people over position. The station and the consulate moved on, as institutions do. And so did Mara and Seryk, with the patient work of mornings and the private courage of nights. In the last light of that day, when the moons cast long silver fingers across the decking, Mara walked to the edge of the ring and looked out at the scatter of stations like a collection of small, stubborn suns. She felt the weight of all the choices behind her. The sorrow still folded into the household drawers. The laughter that had come like a reclaimed echo. Seryk came up beside her and placed a hand gentle, calloused in ways she had come to love, in her shoulder. "You once sent an unsent message," he said, his voice not formal now, but private. "It was the most dangerous good we ever received." She rested her head for a moment against his arm. "It was a mistake," she said. "And look how well it landed." He smiled, a slow, improbable thing that belonged to both species now. Jonah, somewhere inside, called them to supper, and Mara, thinking of all the ways courage could be mistaken for foolishness, of all the ways mistakes became openings, watched the moons and thought, love, like repair, required hands that would not let go even when the machine made noise. In her chest, the old ache softened to something like fuel. They walked back into the glow of their found family, the ring whispering around them an architecture of second chances, and Mara knew, with the calm certainty of someone who had fixed 1,000 things and still had one hand free, that they had chosen each other over the lives that had made them into quieter people. Outside, the moons polished the metal rails to a slow luster. The station hummed. 2 voices laughed as doors shut behind them, and the small comet's fabric caught a last glint of light. Courage showed up here as small work, as repair, as staying. Mistakes, messy public open doors nobody expected. In the end, she thought, perhaps bravery is less about never failing and more about answering when your life starts to sing in the wrong key.